Awesome. I'd like to call to order the June board meeting of the Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District. Before we begin.
Yeah, I wanted to introduce Ashley. Ricci is here. She's our new grant program specialist. Some of you may have met her at Waterfest, but she will be here. She'll be able to answer any questions on the stewardship grant program. We don't have any, but she's been since May 1, so a little over a month now.
Awesome. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm very excited.
Now you have to give a 10-minute speech to all.
Can sum it up in one sentence, I'll say.
Oh, welcome aboard. That's wonderful. So, first order of business, we should introduce the new people. Hi.
Hi, I'm Beth Watcher. I live on the Sunrise Drive.
Oh,
Oh,
thank you. So first we need to approve the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda? So moved. Do I have a second? Second. Wonderful. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Moving forward, we're doing the consent agenda. Remember, all these are going to be approved. We can have a discussion after we approve it if it doesn't change your vote. So do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I would like to remove an item from the consent agenda.
Okay, sounds good.
I'd like to remove the Ramsey County Keller Park Tulu expansion and call it for a roll call.
And we'll put that down under permits. So that
We'll put it under permits.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't actually catch which one. 24?
2426.
Okay, so we'll move that to the permits. That's a good move. Okay, so can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda with the revision of 2426 being moved to the permit program section?
I will move that we approve the consent agenda with that item.
Second.
Okay, now if any discussions or questions pertaining to the consent agenda topics? They were fairly straightforward. Wonderful. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So we are transitioning to visitor comments. You're welcome to make a 4-minute comment if you would like, but I believe we approved her permit. Is that correct?
yeah, she's a resident, and there was somebody online that was a resident as well. But did you have a comment you'd like to make? We give a we have a 4-minute period.
Yeah. Who's the other resident? I apologize.
The Jill Beckman, right?
Jill Reed, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
if she wants to go first, she can.
Jill, did you want to make a comment for the board during visitor comments?
No, I'm just kind of gathering information.
Thanks.
No, I'm just listening in. Thank you.
Okay, I'll move it on.
Yeah.
So I just think that lot should not allow for 4 houses to be built there. About a third of the lot is right next to the wetland. It would be unusable. It would crowd the whole street. There's already existing houses on either side of it. There's a big driver's lake that you're supposedly supposed to help control the pollution that's going into that lake. And then there's obviously a huge pond to the back of that lot. It's not safe. I've almost gotten hit by cars numerous times. My own neighbor almost hit me. Delivery drivers have almost hit me. My dog, my kids. There's no sidewalks at all on Edgerton or on that roadway. And adding 4 new houses with 2-car driveways coming out into that road. It's on a curve. It's very disappointing. At one point, the owner of that lot was told that it was only going to be a 3-house lot, and suddenly now it's going to be 4 houses. If you haven't seen it, you should really go look at it right now. There's tons of water in the side of Edgerton. Because it's a storm sewer, storm water sewer right there. I don't know how close you can be to that, to Edgerton. That would be the closest house on probably the whole Edgerton road. They did, reduce the road to 35 miles an hour, which is still way too fast for a neighborhood and a park. There's no businesses on that road. There's no sidewalks on that road. It's way too fast still. Get hit all the time, almost get hit all the time. And my daughter was hit by a 10-speed bicyclist on Edgerton, right in front of that park at the crosswalk. It's terrible. It's terrible. I don't know how it went from a farmhouse to only allowing 3 houses to now allowing 4 houses. It's gonna be, there's already existing houses in the neighborhood. It will not match the neighborhood. I don't agree with this at all. For the environment, there's multiple animals that live in there, deer. I've seen multiple different birds, eagles. I've seen every kind of animal, turkeys, every kind of animal use that lot. It would be very sad. You should, if you haven't seen the lot, you should go look at it for yourself to see what it's all about. At least a third of it is a hill, a wooded hill, heavily wooded hill going down. There's huge trees, live trees on that lot that I don't know, are you just gonna cut down 100-year-old trees? It'd be so sad.
Have you had an opportunity to voice your concerns to the city?
Yes, well, to the planning,
To
the
planning?
permit committee, yes. Two people on that committee live on that road, and they abstained from the vote, but would have said no. 2 people did say no. There's another little cul-de-sac, Jarvis Hills Drive, that their houses are so close together. You look at the north side of their houses, there's mildew and mold on it. They're way too close together. I don't understand why you want to put 2 close together homes on an existing beautiful neighborhood that has bigger lots. If you want to have a little yard like that, move into a townhouse. It's ridiculous. It really is.
I really appreciate you voicing your concerns. It sounds like you have concerns of safety and really the nature in that area.
Mm-hmm.
As we look at permits, what we try to do is understand, what the city vets the idea, or they're intended to vet the idea, or the planning committee vets the idea. We try our best to ensure that the water management, how it plays, and the impact overall to our water quality and systems, that they meet those regulations. And so as we look to these types of permits, your words are very impactful. But from a legal standpoint, from our jurisdiction, we're kind of restricted to those parameters. It is a good comment to make, and I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Can I add a couple more things?
Maybe just,
If it's quick, if
Yeah.
you don't mind, yes.
Will these homes have basements? Are they gonna be usable basements without water in them? Because my uncle moved into a home or apartment building in Minnesota with underground parking, because you don't wanna park outside in Minnesota, right? In winter? Well, he never was able to use his underground parking because it was always flooded. So are these homes gonna have basements? Are they gonna be safe for tornadoes and severe weather? Or
I honestly don't have that answer,
Yeah.
mainly because the plans that we look at is just all about the water management and runoff control. It's a good question. Do the other houses have basements?
our houses have basements. I
Oh.
don't know about these.
And
I can comment about the lowest floor elevation, because we do have rules that are tied to where the lowest floor needs to be above the 100-year floodplain of the area, and there is a minimum of 2 feet between what we calculate as the 100-year floodplain and where the lowest floor elevation is at. So from that standpoint, that's part of the permitting process that we do here at the watershed, is to look at things like that.
Thank you, Brandon. Again, we appreciate it. It's part of the public forum. It's recorded, your comments are recorded, and thank you very much for on the fly coming out with the comments. That was really good.
Hi, this is Jill Beckman-Ray. I just wanted to, so my house is 2381 Edgerton. And so all of the new build homes will be backing up onto my property. My concern that I've, mentioned to Nicole, and we've seen the plans for the water basin. So my concern, and I know that you've looked at all the plans, so I think some of those homes right now are planned to be walkouts. And I think the one gentleman did mention that it will be above the floodplain, which is great. So with the water basin and all of the rainwater and stormwater going into that, if by chance some of it encroaches on our property and gets into our lower level, who do I contact? Do I contact you guys, the builder? That's my concern. I have concerns with the wetland, but you guys have addressed that, and I appreciate that. But as a property owner, I have to consider, my own home.
I can chime in on that.
Yeah.
So, it would depend on whether the builder and the applicant are meeting the permit standards. So as long as they're compliant with Ramsey-Washington, watershed district rules, then the enforcement would really have to be private between you and the property owner with that nuisance, essentially. If there is concern, I think, I don't want to speak for the board members here, but that's why these are public meetings, so the concern would always be heard and welcomed here. But the extent of the enforcement will be limited to whether it is stemming from a violation of the permit or the district rules.
And I can comment specifically, we took all of Jill's comments during our permit review process. We've been reviewing a number of iterations of this development over the last number of months. We did have all of her comments and communicated those to Brandon with BAR, so all of her comments were in mind during permit review. And that was one thing that we caught as well in an earlier design revision, which we would have anyways, because it's in our rules, but we wanted to make sure there was no encroachment onto the property to the south, and we regulate up to the 100-year flood. So.
Okay, and I do appreciate that. And we did speak with the city engineer as well, and Bill Dirks at the city. And I mean, it seems like it's going to work, but there's no guarantees with anything. So I just I'll just be hopeful that it all works as planned, and we'll see.
Jill, I will mention too, part of our process, not only to issue permits, but to do inspection during construction. You're certainly welcome to communicate any concerns that you may have during construction, but we will have inspectors out there. We do require as-built survey on these ponds and basins to ensure that they're being constructed to the elevations that are listed on the plans.
Okay, and then that'll be, so our front lot is like 250 feet long, and so the basin will run pretty much that entire span. So will the 4 homeowners then be responsible for the upkeep of that water basin? Or who does that fall on?
Yeah, I'll have to, I mean, that's something that we need before we issue the permit. I believe it's still a special provision. We require an operations and maintenance plan and a signed maintenance agreement that's recorded on the property. I know the city of Little Canada has, for some subdivisions like this, agreed to maintain these basins, but I believe in this case, it will be an HOA unless I hear differently. So those are some of the conditions for permit approval that we would need that confirmation, and that responsible party to sign.
an HOA just for those 4 homes or all of Sunrise?
No, just for the development, the new
Against the land.
construction. You would
Just the
not be
4 homes.
responsible for maintaining that new basin.
Interesting. Okay. And then they'll have like HOA fees?
That's not something that I'm privy to at this time.
This is very good. Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, thank you.
What percentage of the home and the driveway is covering their property?
That's not something that we regulate, but I believe city ordinance would regulate like the percent, like hard surface. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah. So our watershed district spans 12 different cities and they all have slightly different ordinances and rules for impervious per lot. Same with lot width, and proximity to adjacent homes. Those are all covered in city rules and ordinance. Our rules don't regulate that.
From the safety aspect, I know, I'm a very close neighbor of that. We've really pursued this with the county to put in sufficient walkways and coverage, with reasonable success. So that would be a recommendation as a constituent that I might recommend. Thank you. Thank you for the discussion. I really appreciate it. As we go, I'd like to transition to permit programs.
Mr. Chair, I'll put this under a visitor comment. I have to leave at 8:15. I'm picking up a family member at 9 o'clock tonight at the airport. So I'm just giving everybody the heads up.
Okay.
But I'm gratified to see we've got a full quorum.
Thank you, sir. Permit programs after you, Nicole.
Yeah. So permit 24-32 is pulled from oh wait, should I do the Tulu first?
Yeah, can we do
Yeah.
the 24-26?
Yeah, yes, let me go back. Permit 24-26 is a Ramsey County Parks project. Almost 10 years ago, which is crazy to think about because I remember the permit when it came through. It was to build Tulu courts in Keller Regional Park, and happily they've experienced a lot of play. So they're deteriorating, and the county's proposing to renovate the courts, add some additional amenities, but also replace what's existing with artificial turf. So there will be a drainage system under the artificial turf, as well as infiltration basins for the pretty small amount of hard surface they're proposing. Yeah, so I'll take any questions.
Yeah, and I'm gonna ask you to
I
lead off.
didn't have any questions. I would like to ask for a roll call because I intend to abstain as a member of the design team.
Thank you. Okay.
So I didn't have any comments. I can answer questions. I don't want to comment on it since I'm, on the other side for this one.
I didn't want to call you out and ask exactly why, but this helps
This
significantly.
helps, yeah.
I personally don't have any comments on it. Does any other board member want to make a comment? Wonderful. So we're going to do this instead of, but can I get a motion to pass 24-26?
So moved.
Yeah, the second. I would like to do a roll call, and we can end with me if you want to start,
Yep.
if you don't mind.
I can start. Ben?
Abstain.
Thank you. Mark?
Aye.
Stephanie? Aye. And Deb?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you for the transparency, Ben. Okay, 24-32, please.
Yeah. Excuse me. This permit was pulled from consent agenda because they are requesting a variance for floodplain fill. This project's located along Childs Road, sort of in the industrial section near the Mississippi River. The applicant is the landowner, St. Paul Port Authority. They're proposing to construct a new platform to aid in unloading of barges along the river. They did trigger Army Corps permits as well as DNR permits. Those have been reviewed and approved. They did trigger our permit despite the small amount of disturbance because of the work in the floodplain and the fill that's being proposed in the form of riprap. They did include a variance request for filling in the floodplain without providing compensatory storage. And their reasoning for that is their modeling and calculations have demonstrated no increase
in the 100-year flood level of the river. So they've included some modeling results as well as a no rise certificate from FEMA, which is something they would have needed as well. In short, the floodplain is so massive and the amount of fill is so small that the calculated impacts from the fill is nothing. So that is the reason for the variance.
Ask a question on the modeling results. Maybe I misunderstood when I read it, are those modeling, the memo that was attached in March? Did they revisit that modeling? Or was it just a recertification of the modeling they did in the 2013/19 periods? Did they need to?
Say that again.
I'm looking on page 84. This is the memo that goes into the modeling. When I read through it, it felt like the last time we ran the model was back in the 2013/2019 timeframes. Was there any need to rerun that assessment? Seeing as it's 2024.
Typically, how we look at these is we use the existing model, so it may have been used several years ago for something similar. But we pull that and we make the changes that are proposed here, so they have cross sections across the river. And so you'd show this incremental little bit of extra fill, and then you'd rerun the model to be able to show that basically there's no change in what the model results are. That's typically how this was done. I assume that's what this applicant did and Brandon reviewed.
Yeah, and
like that.
the dates might be, they were planning to do this project last year and never got to the watershed permitting stage, so I don't know if that.
Yeah, I think they're just saying that they took those base models to use.
That's what I was trying to, and it wasn't clear to me when I read it, so I apologize. But so it's not, so they use those base models, they increase the fill, and then they just reran it to understand the impact, and what it, I'm assuming, concluded was the certification stands.
Yeah, no, they'd have to show no rise to get that certification.
Perfect.
That's what we're basically about.
Thank you. Any further questions on the permit?
Yeah, there was a interesting question. It says, I don't even know what page it is. In that memo, it says the watershed district requested the thickness of the fill. Is that the same reference that Bell is referring to? They're calculating the amount of riprap to be placed within the 100-year floodplain. And it shows that if they do what we've requested, it only comes out to like 0.001 inches thick. So that's the same.
Yeah, it's not something we requested that they provide results for that amount of fill spread out across that floodplain to inform their rise in elevation, which they didn't show any, but they also calculated here, I believe, what that material, how thick that would be if spread across the whole floodplain. So
it's just to make a point.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
That was across the section, right? Not the entire.
I think they
Right.
uniformly
The whole-
is how I read
Yeah,
it.
across over 4 million.
well, it's
This parcel.
both sides of the river.
Yeah, it goes floodplain to floodplain. It's a
Yeah.
large area.
Yeah.
It sounded like it was just an input parameter to the model for fill is what it looked like. That's a good question though. That's why I was just trying to understand how they ran it, and what they ran it on. Okay, do I have go ahead, Ben.
I'm just gonna ask, has the watershed run into this FEMA no rise in the past, and how have they handled it in those situations?
Yeah, the area by the Mississippi River is a little bit different than how we regulate. Well, I shouldn't say regulate, but where we're willing to entertain variances when they're not landlocked lakes, wetlands, and it's a more dynamic, a larger system. So it's not uncommon that we trigger these very small projects adjacent to the river, because in a lot of cases, their entire property is in the floodplain. So anything that they're doing could trigger our permit. And it's not uncommon that we'd see a variance because of the nature of the floodplain. And, there's areas that are ineffective. I don't know, Brad, you could probably explain it better, but.
Yeah, this is, I can think of at least two, maybe
Yeah.
3 situations in the past 10 years where we've had something very similar. A small amount of fill, we were able to show that through the modeling that there was no rise, and we approved the variance request.
Thank you.
Adjacent question, this isn't our model, is that correct?
That's correct.
Do we do any kind of cross verification of their assessments?
I don't know if we have river model.
Uh,
Well, we haven't modeled the river.
No, we don't model. the
No,
Okay,
so that's.
So
the
that's
idea.
why.
Army Corps models.
yeah, I didn't,
Yeah.
when I looked at the name of it and I did some Google looking, I was like, oh, I haven't heard that. Any further questions? May I have a motion to approve permit 2432?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Enforcement action reports.
Yeah, it's been a busy, rainy month. We're thankful to have our intern Kendra, and Mary's been running around to different sites all month. She's joining us here on Teams. Happy to answer any questions about anything, particularly in the project updates, I'm assuming are of interest, about the discharges that either were reported to our staff or discovered by our staff during the month of May.
Open up to y'all. Questions or comments?
I believe the Ramsey County, the White Bear Avenue Carpenter, sounds like there was some release of sediment, and Hackett described it that it likely had resulted from water moving through that previous grate. Have they since kind of isolated that so that additional rains aren't going to result in the same kind of thing?
Yeah, I'll let Mary probably speak to the specifics. I know that one of the practices that we were advocating for was diversion, because part of the problem was they were getting runoff from undisturbed sections of pavement that were then making its way to the low point and crossing over disturbed soil. So it was essentially clean water made dirty by the fact that they weren't bypassing the flow. But Mary, I don't know if you have any updates or want to add anything about that.
Yeah, it's a pretty unique and complicated intersection because all 4 roads slope down towards the main intersection of White Bear Ave and Larpenteur, which, like Nicole mentioned, it makes it very tricky if all the water is flowing in the same direction. So they've tried to implement diversion so that water upstream just goes into the existing catch basins and doesn't travel over the site. That large trench drain that I think was in the last enforcement report, half of the section's been removed from the section of road under construction to try to just keep the clean paved road going in there and the disturbed section out of it. And then they've tried to implement like rock check dams along the disturbance just to try to slow the rate of the water coming down. And then ultimately, they've been trying to kind of push the water that does come from the project into a pre-treatment pond that's adjacent to Wakefield Lake, where it would be much easier to clean that up rather than like recover the sediment from the lake itself. And they also installed additional floating silt curtain as like a last resort if there's like a really large rain event and it somehow gets over there, that they have a couple lines of protection from it like dissipating throughout the pre-treatment pond or the lake itself.
Diverting around that grate and then pumping, kind of bypassing the storm sewer, that hasn't been brought as a possible alternative route. So rather than relying on the existing storm sewer to carry water from that low area, pumping it during construction.
Yeah,
Not a wild idea, but
Yeah, no, they do that. I've seen that, where it's like a trap almost, like where they can then filter, maybe add flock, pump it out, pump it to a portable, like rain for rent. I don't think that there's any available space in this area. Is that correct, Mary, for something like a, a sediment trap that we'd see on like a MnDOT project?
Yeah, essentially the water is gathering, I mean, within feet of the main intersection. So they are trying to get the water to leave as quick as they can without letting it pool. But I do think maybe there would be a potential for a rain to rent, which are those like holding tanks. If there's a large amount of water coming to this low area that they need to remove for safety concerns, as well as cleaning up the water before it's discharged off site. So that's something I can definitely bring up to the site to see if it's something they've considered or is practical for the location of the project.
Thank you.
Thanks for the suggestion. Further questions? The enforcement report? Always appreciate the thoroughness, Nicole. Thank you. Moving forward.
Yeah, before we move on, I'll just let Meredith and Jill and our guests here too, that all the permits have been approved. You're welcome to stay and listen, but we are done with the permit sections.
After you, Paige.
Yeah, so yeah, Tina did a nice introduction to Ashley. She started on May 1st, the day of the last board meeting, and has been busy with a few staff approvals. You saw one application on the consent agenda, a few maintenance grants, but yeah, busy with just getting thrown right into things.
Ooh, on the staff approval for the rain garden and hard surface drainage I know that there had been talk about green roof activities happening. Was that associated to any of those programs under discussion, or?
Nothing has been approved yet for the green roof. There was one.
Okay, I was curious.
Yes, there's one we're looking at. That'll be a larger
Okay. I was
dollar amount. Yes.
wondering. I saw that there was some approvals in that area, and I was like, ooh,
No,
did
you
that
will
come
definitely
through?
see that one come through. Probably not for a little while.
One thing that I've thought about raising in past meetings is the table has a couple of footnotes that are ostracized, that reference changes from a previous month to current month. And I'm wondering if it's possible to kind of more clearly delineate projects that have occurred in the most recent months, so we can see, we want to see it as, kind of individual basis, but also what the new things are.
So like a comparison, side-by-side comparison of last month, there was 9, this month there's 10 in this line item.
Yeah, something like that, just to give a little bit of better understanding, kind of how it's evolving over time, because I think the numbers have been cumulative largely over time, haven't they? Unless I'm misinterpreting.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
for
much
the year,
like,
it's a year. Yeah, funds allocated.
yes. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I see that the one asterisk says includes funds to be approved for current board meeting, includes staff approvals since previous board meeting, and I guess I see where the one.
It's paired with the 2, so it's got 3.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see one use of that asterisk. It would be nice to have just a little clearer, if it can be done.
Sure, Ashley can figure it out.
Yeah, so are you essentially trying to look at like last month's budget numbers versus this month's budgeted numbers?
Sure, as well as number of projects.
Well, yes,
Right,
including, yes, dollar with numbers.
That works. So we, when I was first joined the board, we had asked for that asterisk or being able to send, but because we were working through staff approvals for these. I like the idea of finding a way to separate. Are you interested in like, oh, staff approved 4 of them for this much, and then these are the ones that were under consideration for the board meeting? Would that be a sufficient kind of spot? Just to at least educate us in terms of the number of approvals coming through. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, I think so. What I'm looking for is kind of a separation of, okay, this is what we had previously seen.
Yeah.
And then in this month, this current month, what are the additional, clearly delineated number of projects, and it could be even, a separate table below the main table. I mean, there's probably several different ways, a separate column, even in a tabular statement. Could be another,
Yeah, so the outcome is like some sort of way to differentiate month over month. I think that makes some sense. And do you mind maybe as part of that, if there is some time on the next agenda, we could just highlight, oh, this is what counts as a staff approval, what it looks like, because I do know there's new board members and it'd be nice just to revisit, but hey, this is what.
So the clarification too for staff, is anything under that 5,000? So you guys looking to see what those individual dollar amounts are, or just, okay?
I don't think it needs to be itemized. I don't think that's what Mark's asking about. Just an understanding of like a delta change between time periods. And if you have an opportunity to differentiate this is a staff versus a non-staff, that seems pretty reportable.
I currently have last month's May's next to this month's June one, so look at the numbers side by side, so.
And Ashley loves
That is-
spreadsheets, so.
I do like spreadsheets, so I.
That is definitely how I do reviews. I get it. Good request.
Thank you.
I just want to share a comment. I do log into a lot of these webinars and discussions about maintenance and stormwater infrastructure. And the big message again and again and again over the last year really has been, if we don't maintain them, then they fall into disuse. They're no longer functioning. And so I would just ask you to make sure that the people who so willingly accept and so are so excited to be grant awardees, that they know what they're doing. Because after the maintenance grant also runs out, then it's difficult.
Yeah, I would say, we definitely take that seriously, and now, so that'll be part of Ashley's duties, is doing the annual inspections, sending maintenance newsletters. Yes, and trying to, even if, they have a contractor do the maintenance for those 5 years of the maintenance grant, working with them, okay, now this is what you're going to have to do, and even being upfront with people during the initial site visits too has helped.
And if, I know some other groups are using, other watershed districts are teaming people up with a water steward, just to kind of like, if you need someone to walk you through it and say that's a weed.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some program considerations for future, like whether that's incorporating the water stewards or even conservation corps. There's definitely, I think, other avenues. It's just now having more staff to actually have the capacity to push that. I'll be working with Warren too, to make sure that communications are going out and being consistent, and looking to make sure that we're really pushing home that maintenance message.
I do really like the idea of partnering with CAC or having some of that access for individuals looking for tips on maintenance. So as you scope that out, it's not leverage the community, especially people who are willing. Always work with the willing. Thank you. Moving forward to action items.
Yep, we'll kick it off. Actually, I'll pass it on to Nicole for the first one, which is our MS4 SWIP. Lots of acronyms there.
Yes, yeah. I tried to define as many things as I could. So this is an annual requirement from the NPCA. We are regulated MS4, which means we're owning and operating a storm sewer system. So there are a number of different categories and requirements within those categories of programs and activities that we're required to complete and report on usually. The last couple of years, there has not been any annual reports being submitted to the NPCA. They don't have a current form for us to fill out the annual report. So we're continuing to track our data as if we were still reporting, but they have gotten delayed, I guess, in rolling out that online report tool. So it's expected that next year we'll have to report on 3 years of data. So 24, 23, and 22 next year. So typically you would see in this scenario an annual report specific to last year's activities. Since I don't know what the annual report is going to entail, I included the district's SWIP, stormwater pollution prevention program application that was submitted to the MPCA that kind of outlines what our normal activities are. And then as part of those requirements, we solicit comments from the public. Generally, if it were an annual report, I would also like to hear any comments from you prior to me submitting our annual report to the state. So it's a little bit different this year, but still wanted to provide an official opportunity for comment.
Can I ask, Lauren, do we have to open up for public comments?
It's
or
not a public
announce?
hearing, it's just an
Okay.
opportunity for.
Thank you. I just
You
wanted to
know,
get clarity.
yeah.
Because,
We've typically done the noticing at board meetings, but we also have that information on our website. Some organizations like table at an event, like I think Ramsey County and City of St. Paul maybe, they use Waterfest actually as their public participation opportunity. I don't know that they see a lot of traffic at their table about comments on their SWIP, but
We did one year, we did it at
Yeah.
Waterfest, we didn't get anything.
yeah.
it's quite difficult to add
Yeah.
comments to add
Yeah.
value to this type of format. Just did so.
Mhm.
I don't have any personally. I don't know if others have read through or maybe have caught something I missed.
It's my only question. So what you provided us, the application, and it's a similar application that's been submitted each year,
Every 5 years.
every 5.
Yeah, so this is the current
And
SWIP.
I should probably acknowledge that I work for the pollution control agency, though I'm not involved at all in this area. But from regard of watershed district, have we typically heard back, received any kind of approval or for that matter, comments on our SWIPs?
Oh, from the state?
Yeah.
We have been audited, so that's always, there's always a chance that you could be your program could be audited. They could choose one minimum control measure, or they could choose to audit you for all 5, 6. But I mean, to my knowledge, I don't know when that, it would have been prior to.
I mean, we get official approval of when we submit an application. and so-
Yeah, yep, we do have permit coverage, so the application that you saw was approved, I should say, yeah. As far as the ongoing year-to-year activities, it would be more so of an audit. When
Yeah,
they,
and it was probably 15 years ago when they audited, so I would guess that our time is probably up. And they did one minimum control measure, I think it was the education one, yeah, public education.
so I also meet with different program areas that are responsible for these different MCMs to just make sure that we are tracking, especially in this time of not reporting, to make sure that we're not slipping on the data collection and storage, frankly, for when we do need to report on previous year's activities. So, water quality staff, they're involved with the illicit discharge detection and elimination. We have folks like Dave and Paige that are responsible for the pollution prevention, the inspection of our own facilities. Me and Mary are more so the construction site, inspection, minimum control measures. And then Lauren and Sage with the education and outreach. So there's a number of staff involved in implementing these activities, and I'm kind of responsible for wrangling the information and making sure that we're paying attention to any changes in the permit and things like that. So.
I think our only board action is to have public comments, and it sounds like we don't have public comments. So thank you for this, and there's no other action. I'd like to move to item B then, this county road C culvert flood reduction project bid.
So that was the memo that was put in your spot when you arrived, that has the results, so that's right.
Yeah, thank you. Last month, staff was here asking for your approval of the preliminary plans and authorization to go ahead and create the bid package, get it out for bid. We did that during the last few weeks and opened bids on this project on Monday. Typically, we try to get these in early enough so we can get them in the board packet, but because of final design things we had to tweak and the holiday in there, it did creep over into Monday. So I apologize for receiving this at this time, but I think the good news is we did receive 6 bids. They were generally in the range. The engineer's estimate of probable construction cost was $586,284. And as you can see, the apparent low bidder, Bituminous Roadways, was pretty close to that number. We do put a range on that, of course, when we do this estimate, and that range is between $527,700 to $703,600. So that grabs many of the bids for the 6 bids, but I think it's in the range. Bituminous Roadways, the district has not, to my knowledge, contracted with them directly as a general. I know they've been a sub on a number of projects where they've provided the paving work that may have been tied with the project. But they are a very familiar name in the Twin Cities. They've been around since 1946. We do hear really good things from them, and I do know they have a utilities arm that has been around for a while, and that would be the group within Bituminous Roadways that would work on this culvert replacement project. So, if you approve or you award the project to Bituminous Roadways, we'll go ahead and get the request the submittals, give them the notice of award, provide the contract to them. They would provide the performance bond, payment bond, certificate of insurance, and then Lauren and I will go through the review of that, and then we proceed with the work probably starting in late June, maybe early July. They would have until the 1st of September to wrap it up. So this is one of several projects along Coleman Creek that you've seen in the studies that have been going on that are going to help reduce flood risk throughout that area. The timing of this was connected to some work that the county was doing on County Road C. So we wanted to get this done first, so we weren't basically going in after the fact and tearing up the new roadway. So and my understanding is the district's being reimbursed by the county for this culvert as well. So I think 100% of the construction related costs are coming back to the district through this process. So.
Could you help me really quickly understand the relation to the 24-27 permit program associated to this bid proposal? Are they related?
Yeah, same projects are oftentimes our own projects trigger our own rules. So we do permit our own projects as well.
Yeah. Do we have any interactions with the DNR specifically with this one, similar to that permit in terms of?
Yeah, we, bar staff have been consulting with the DNR because Coleman Creek is a public water. And we were also wanting to make sure that there was no wetland, jurisdiction, which would fall back to me. So it is just, the DNR that has jurisdiction over Coleman Creek.
How do I learn
this area
more about DNR jurisdictions over our creek systems? That was first time for me reading that.
There's actually, I could send you a link. There's a great mapping tool. I use it frequently whenever I get a wetland delineation. It's called the National Wetland Inventory, Wetland Finder. I can certainly provide you the URL, but it's essentially a mapping tool where you can zoom in anywhere in Minnesota. And there's different hatching or shading to denote whether or not the DNR has jurisdiction over that particular either water course, lake, or wetland.
That would be super helpful for learning. Yeah. And does this company, would they have to interact with the DNR?
I don't think they would have a lot of interaction with the DNR.
Outside of that permit.
Yeah, that permit would be
right
in place. And, Nicole would, be helping with the inspection and things like that to make sure they're consistent with that, consistent with the district permit.
And it's our responsibility to be fiscal responsible, so I think we'd like to look at rewarding it here, but as I consider back to some of our previous experience with Cruella, which we just rewarded recently, I think, what is it, February? Did I get that right? March. It's a new company that we hadn't worked with beforehand. There's always a learning journey that we go down. Hopefully we're prepared with this particular.
Yeah, I mean, with Cruella, they were a new company in general.
Yeah.
But Two Minutes Runaways is not, they've been around.
Yeah, and I'm just mentally
they
trying to do
have
the delta between those two situations because I'm not wary of new companies. It's not what I'm trying to imply, but I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, I would say we did learn here very recently that a company we have worked with a number of times, Jedlicki, they've been on a number of jobs. They actually, Bituminous Roadways purchased Jedlicki, and Garrett Jedlicki will be leading this project. So we are familiar with the individual and those individuals. And we've had good success with that particular contract in the past. So if that's some reassurance.
It is definitely for me.
Have we, I mean, it seems to have come up a few times, and I think there's another bid that we may approve that, again, the Cottage Park, wait till we get there, but do we track at all who bids? And then we can look back and say, oh, they bid on these 3 projects, they hadn't gotten.
You have all the bidders here,
Yeah.
so we have that,
Right,
as well as
but-
the people that take our plans.
Right, but I'm just in, next, a year and a half from now, is there a way that we could look to see, member companies did bid on a previous project, even though we may or may not, I don't know, I'm just thinking them hypothetically.
No, they have.
Yeah, but they're kind of looking, for, work in this area and from this organization, even though they were not awarded bids previously.
Yeah.
So we have a way to pull that out.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And there are very familiar repeat names that we see coming back time and time again, and some of those we just have not seen as a low bidder yet. So, but yeah, we get a lot of attention.
Yeah, I would think that that could be a good source of information.
It definitely is. That, and then track how the program cost evolves compared to their initial bid is always nice.
Yeah, well, and we do our reference checks too, with other watersheds and cities and counties that work with these.
I have I'm not sure that I should bring it, but there is a plant right along this road that, essentially right over this culvert existing. That is a recognized invasive, though it is not noxious, it's not on AG's list, but it's bristly locust, and it would certainly be one that we would not want to see spread. So from the construction practice, as well as it's kind of an opportunity for them, they're gonna be excavating. The excavation will essentially remove the population. So I don't know if that's something we can add as a condition.
Well, sometimes we'll go out and do it ahead of time too, have our staff, depending on how big of an area it is, if it's something we can do, have our staff do it first.
And Dave will be on site for most of this, so we'll make sure he knows about that bristly locust.
Yeah, if you go now, it's like a really colorful, pretty
Okay.
plant, but if you go in another month or so, you will, unless it kind of pricks you and you donate some blood. You may not recognize it.
Yeah, well, Pat's on here, hopefully he's listening. Have them check it out too.
This is the joy of having like a diverse board. I
Yeah.
would never- Protect that.
So I would say, do you have questions? So we have reviewed the submittals that the Bituminous Roadways have provided as a part of, their bid that they put in, and they do meet bidding requirements that we laid out. So we would consider them the lowest apparent responsive and responsible bidder. And there is language here if you choose to make an award that you can use as a motion on the backside of this.
I will go ahead and
Oh, yeah. I would motion to accept the bids and award the County Road C Culvert Flood Risk Reduction Project to Bituminous Roadways. Direct staff to prepare and mail the notice of award and prepare the agreements and review the required submittals.
Mr. Chair, Ben, beat me to it, but I'd like to second this and note that having both bid on and awarded multi-million-dollar projects, I'm in awe that this contractor did not round down to 2 cents. I'm in full support, knowing that if you get 2 cents of canvassing of, I'm sure the park over here will scare up 2 pennies.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Tina, just one quick request. Can we make sure that this finds its way on our document library? I looked for another one earlier.
What we'll do is amend the packet, so.
Thank you so much. Okay, financial audit.
Yes, so this is an informational item, you accept it, you don't approve it, it's already been submitted and completed, but our 2023 audit has been completed. We have an unmodified clean opinion, which is the highest opinion that you can be given, and there was no internal control, finance, or compliance. I included that management letter in the packet and then linked the audit, the full audits for your information. Happy to answer any questions.
It was this process that helped us identify the need for the change order that we approved last month. Is that correct?
Yes, and so that's all accounted for
In the
final
report.
audit.
Yeah, when I was reading through, it didn't stand out, so we addressed it. I've read these for the last 5 years. I do not have questions.
I looked through it, I guess I didn't have any questions either, I was pleased that there are no issues. I mean, I try to look at the budget every month and track our money and are responsible as looking forward and project specific, so. I certainly would recognize the value of the audit being done and recognize the results we received.
And they also based it off of just conversations with different board members too. So they do some independent assessments is the way.
Yeah, they usually pick one or two. You got a call.
I got a call this time.
I don't know if anyone else did, but they'll check in on fraud and other concerns you might have.
It was a wonderful conversation. Wonderful. Do I have oh shoot, wrong action. We have to move to accept.
Yeah, move to accept it.
Do I have a motion to accept the audit report?
I will accept the audit.
Anyone second?
Second.
Wonderful. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Moving on. This one, I think will.
The big one, yeah, this
D
is
and E will have.
the belt line discussion, and turn over to Brad.
Sure, thank you. If you recall last summer, those of you who were on the board last summer, there was a couple of sinkholes discovered over the last 50 or so feet of the belt line before it discharges into the river. This is a 9-foot diameter steel pipe that's been there for many, many years, and it had started to deteriorate. So that was definitely of concern to us, given the amount of flow that passes through there. And so we went in and did, late in the summer, kind of an urgent, somewhat emergency, patch job. But as you recall, we said we're going to have to get this section replaced. And this project is the replacement of that section. Again, it's about 50 to 52 feet from the river upstream. It would be the removal of that steel pipe and replacement of that pipe. It's 9 feet in diameter. We went back and forth about using a box culvert to provide more cover over it. That's a little bit tougher to work with. We have some constraints that I'll explain here in a second. But we ultimately landed on a round pipe, and I think that's going to work much better for this application, and we'll have enough cover based on the design that we went through. So we should be in good shape there. There's a connection manhole that's just upstream of that, and as you can imagine this large structure to connect these two pipes from upstream to downstream is almost the size of a small building underground, but that too will be replaced as a part of this work. If you saw in the memo that was included in the packet, you can see how this discharges through a sheet pile wall at the river. That's under the ownership of the St. Paul Port Authority, and that's where barges pull up, so they are concerned of how we handle the pass-through of that wall. And as a part of that wall, there are tiebacks underground that hold that wall from tipping into the river. And those are very close to our construction too. So you can see, if you look closely on the plans that were included, sheeting that's used to help protect those tiebacks and allow us the room that the contractor needs to work within to get that pipe in place. So that's essentially the scope of work. And as you see in the packet, the engineer's opinion of probable construction cost is $968,000 with a range of about 872 to 1.114 million for this work. So it's important. I think this is a piece of the Beltline that we couldn't get to do any patches in the past, and now it's really in need of a full replacement to maintain the integrity of that section of the drainage system. So, any questions on the work?
I spent quite a bit of time looking through these materials, and there's a lot of detail in the construction diagrams, a lot of construction diagrams. And one thing that kind of I had a difficult time kind of picking up, looking across all of them, it's just, it looks like a very busy area with the railroad and the flood, flood wall and the roadway. What utilities have been identified that may be a potential constraint or concern to be working on? Are there any?
They would be the ones that we have identified would be shown already on the plans. And then the contractor will still be required to do a locate to find any additional in the area. But that's pretty much the best we can do at this point. We'll put the ones on the plan that we can find through our own information.
So at this point, we don't really have any that are rising to the top. Oh, we've got this fiber optic, or we've got this other sewer line, anything that we're gonna have to deal with.
Yeah, I don't know about the specifics of this, but they would have identified those on the plans already, had they been. So,
And I
I don't recall that being a part of the discussion to this point. So,
Thank you, Brett.
Yeah.
I do have a question, and I was trying to connect the dots here. So our original cause of the issue was disturbance in those pothole formations. Is there, and it introduced us to the problem, maybe it wasn't causal, but so thinking about putting this new construction in, and is there anything that we're putting in place maybe to reduce the chances of further failure outside of the pipe itself? Are there, so if we make an assumption that the potholes led to worsening of a problem, is that fair?
Well, the pothole
The
was.
potholes
Or the potholes revealed the problem?
Yes.
What is the only problem with that particular section just the age of the pipe, or were there other forces at play that caused it? I'm just trying to connect some dots here. And I like the replacement of concrete. That's not at all what I'm trying to challenge.
I truly believe the age of the pipe, the deterioration of the pipe, once that there became essentially holes rusted through the pipe, you get water from the surface that carries soil down through it. And so now with a new pipe, it's limited to basically what's inside the pipe. The joints are watertight, and the soil and water won't get through those. So,
and I can't remember, what do we contract the cement to in terms of life? do they test doing kind of like testing on the cement pipes?
Oh, I think
You get where I'm
generally
going, I'm just kind of
speaking,
curious.
yeah, I think there's a 50-year design life, but
That's,
as you saw with the rest of the Beltline, which is well over 100 years old, we can service that to get much more out of it.
yeah,
too.
mileage
So
of it.
I think this will be in place for a very long time.
No further questions from me.
One more thing. So there were a number of diagrams that illustrate that the actual outfall for the Beltline is through this flood wall, and it's a square opening. And the pipe is round, and the old adage of, the square peg in a round hole, whichever. I'm just, is there any consideration, or should we have any consideration? Number one, any fluid, water coming against that flood wall in the sort of rounded areas that butt to that square area, so that it's being held back with some turbulence. If that would, cause back pressure, that would be a problem. And with that consideration, is it worth, at this point, coffer dam and pipe being totally replaced, something that we should match the opening round to round, so that it is more, better fit and avoid any potential turbulence?
Well, I know there's been a lot of discussions about that, point of passing through. So, that with the Port Authority has been a point of discussion from the very beginning of the design. So I know that's been addressed to the satisfaction of the Port Authority. I think one thing that they are looking at is, the potential disturbance of the tiebacks to the wall there. That's I think the main concern right now. We're still working through the final things that they're looking to us to reassure them that the wall, the integrity of the wall will be put in place, but that wall is much, as we see, much attention to all of this. So the connection point, I don't know exactly how they landed on what they're proposing here, but
Are you
I
talking
just
about
know
the,
there's been a lot of.
are you talking about the pipe collar reinforcement drawings? Is that what you're calling out? Or are you just saying because of the shape difference in the water flow?
Difference and turbulence, unless the square edge or, square area completely surpasses and fully encloses the round area in that collar, in which case I would think as you look into it, you would see the round, collar of pipe, but I'm not seeing that in any of the diagrams. So I get a picture of, a round and then a square kind of, not, so there's some portion of that round object that butts up against a square. So from a volume transfer, there's a potential of some portion not passing through, because the circumference volume of, or area of the pipe is going to be greater than the square.
Do you
So
think it
it's
risks?
gonna be opened up though to match the 9-foot diameter pipe. It's
So-
not gonna butt in there. I'm looking at the diagram right here. If you look on
Yeah, the pipe collar is.
page 4, C-04, the one elevation view, you can see how that will go through that wall.
I was gonna ask if you were worried about integrity or something else.
So I think, Mark, what you're concerned about is just butting that round pipe up against that square opening.
But there is a collar that.
So there's, what I'm seeing here is it shows the cutout of the circular.
It looks like a rounded collar, which is where I was.
Yeah, the future collar's it's got a concrete collar to fill the gap around the pipe. It's not just open to soil or anything.
Yeah, I didn't think as much soil as much as the transfer of water, if it's hitting the backside of that.
No, I don't think
No.
it's gonna.
There's gonna be within that concrete.
Oh, if I were just to reframe, are you worried about the integrity of that wall connector to the pipe? Because from where I'm looking, the water flow isn't as impacted, but are you just worried that there's an interaction there between the wall and the pipe? Is that the concern?
Yes.
And I assume that's probably the most of what you guys were talking about in terms of,
Pipe will be through it.
okay,
Yeah, the
It's
pipe
not
is
gonna
in.
go like this.
yeah,
It'll be
that's
through it.
what I was trying to get.
And then that collar will be built to make that connection.
Thank you. I'm not an engineer, like I said, I spent quite a bit of time with them, but I apparently missed the detail on that call, so.
I think it's on page 177 is where it kind of starts showing it. It's a great question. Interactions and intersections are always a risk point for any type of flowing type of dynamic, but
HC12 has a good
yeah, that's
section of
awesome.
the existing wall pipe collar. Where, so that's where the river interfaces.
It's a good conversation on an interface, man, because interfaces are typically where things break. All right.
Any other
Yes.
questions or comments? We are, if you like what you see here, basically what we're seeking is approval of the preliminary plans and outline the specifications, the budget, the scope of the work, and the schedule that's laid out in the memo. And then we direct staff to go ahead and finalize those, create the bidding documents, and advertise the project for bid.
So you could say so moved.
It's exactly
Like
what's
you've been
written.
doing it. Call out so moved. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any further comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye. We will go ahead and put this out for bid then, and you should see bids back at the July meeting. I think we're meeting a week later,
July
right?
10th.
So that will give us the time, and then, hope to have a contractor on board by late July, early August, but they probably will not start until flows are, a bit lower and, probably late fall, early winter. This is winter work, but we want to make sure we get everything lined up.
It'd be wonderful at some point for this to be part of a tour, just to see it go down, because it does look like you're putting it effectively like a giant building.
Challenging spot, if you saw in the plans, even under low flow conditions, there is water. This pipe sits in water, so there's going to be water in the plant in this part.
We'll see if we can get some good video.
Yeah, something like that would be interesting.
We can share that.
I haven't seen one of those walls put up where they vacuum up water. It's wonderful. So let's move to the Cottage Place Wetland Restoration Bid Award. This is another new number one.
Yeah, so we had, so you saw this last month, authorize it to go out for bid. We received 5 bids, a few of the same names from the County OFC one, but so Dinky Excavating was the low bid, another new contractor to us, but not new, they had good references, good projects, examples that they shared with us. They were present at we had a non-mandatory pre-bid meeting, and Dinky and then another subcontractor were present at that, so walked through the project area with us and had a lot of good questions, and and then you'll see the permit come through next month for this, so.
Have we heard anything since May 28th on some of the requests made by Bar to the company?
We're starting to receive, some of the information back. I think there's still some that is
Yeah, maybe some
expected.
minor things, but yeah, I think the big things have been answered.
At this point, there hasn't been any reason for concern yet, but we would like.
But we would still motion on a contingent to your final review.
Yeah.
There were a couple questions or implied questions earlier about this particular action item. Anyone on the board? I am too, and just out of curiosity, if you guys pass it, do you mind just putting it in the project updates? That would be great, so we just keep track of that in terms of progress. So if there's no further questions, can we have a contingent, can I have a motion for a contingent approval upon bar and district staff satisfaction with the qualification evidence provided by the apparent lowest responsible and responsive bidder, Dimke Excavating? Award the project to Dimke Excavation at the bid price of the bid price, and direct staff to request the required bonds and insurance information, execute the contract for the work. Do I have a second? Nice. Perfect. Further questions and discussions? All in favor, say aye. Aye. It's a very straightforward action. Checking out the time.
Yes. Good to be with you all here. Not a ton for me to report tonight, but obviously lots of projects coming through, which usually means that our office is doing a lot of contract review, reviewing insurance coverage and performance bonds and payment bonds and all of that. So especially with some of the newer contractors new to the district, I think we'll probably work closely with bar and district staff to make sure all of the requirements of the contract documents are being met. So, and we're still working on the Fish Creek appraisals.
That's for easements, is that right?
Yes, yeah, and really our hang up has been getting the appraisals done out there, and I know we have an appraiser now. That was a big hurdle, is to find someone who had availability and the willingness to do it. It's kind of a unique question to ask an appraiser in this kind of situation. So it is an appraiser that I've worked with before with Valley Branch Watershed District, and he's willing to do it. And I believe he's been working closely with Dave and Tyler Olson at bar to visit the sites. And I think that's happening this week or next.
Thank you. Any questions for them? Okay, board discussion topics. This is a point where we can bring up ideas and comments. I would like to ask Tina what the procedure would be, because just checking out time, I think it would be advantageous for us to jump to the internal loading presentation. So Matt's here during that.
Yep.
Do you mind if we move item number 9? Do I need a motion to do it? Okay, let's move number 9 after the new reports, because I'd like to jump into the managing lake for Matt's benefit before he leaves.
All right, Keith, you're up. Keith is back.
Hi, I'm assuming you can all hear me.
Yeah,
Yes.
we can.
Okay, let me get my presentation fired up here. Okay. You guys are on Zoom, so that's always a challenge for me.
Always something.
Okay. All right. Let me share this thing. All right. So our last conversation was actually just a couple months ago. It was about Coleman Lake and aquatic plants and internal loading, and also about the Shell Lake aeration study that I had completed. And I think at that meeting, you all had, I think there was consensus that you want to keep the Coleman Lake discussion going, and especially in light of the fact that Coleman Lake is now off the impaired waters list. Yes.
Do you mind switching your display view for us? We're looking at
Oh.
presenter view. It just helps readability.
How should I do that?
Up above on display, right? Display settings. You see that up there? The top.
Display settings. I see more. Let me see here.
No, up, right? Above, I think you can see.
Oh, I see that. Sorry about that. Should I use swap presenter view and slideshow? Is that what I should do?
Yeah.
All right.
There you go.
There. Great. Thank you so much. So tonight I'll be talking about Coleman Lake, and which is basically continue our discussion about Coleman Lake and internal loading control in Coleman Lake, and then kind of kicking off new discussions about Wakefield Lake. And the reason I added on Wakefield is I think we touched on it before in the past, and also this is another lake that has notable internal loading, and so I thought I'd begin the discussions and continue discussions on that. It's one that is unique, and I'll talk about why it kind of fits into our general discussions we've had about internal loading plants and aeration. So the work we've been doing is part of ongoing studies that we've been working on, trying to keep the ball rolling on water quality as flooding has kind of taken the show. We have done studies on wet dredging of Wakefield Lake. We also did a study on internal loading across several lakes in the district, 7 lakes, where we cored them pretty intensively and evaluated internal loading. And then more recently, we did a cost benefit analysis of a whole range of potential internal loading control techniques. And we used Bennett Lake and Wakefield Lake as our examples of 2 lakes that are shallow and also have internal loading and need to be dealt with. Out of that study, we identified alum, which is aluminum treatment to control internal loading, direct oxygen injection, and aeration is 3 of the most practical and low-cost methods for controlling internal loading. And so that report was submitted just a couple of years ago to the board and is available for review. I'm going to get back into this just briefly. I think it's always good to look at these things twice, to talk about sediment and phosphorus in sediment. And I have a diagram here. It gets a little bit technical, but on the left, I have a picture of sediment core coming out of a lake, what you typically see in a shallow lake or even a deep lake. We take that back to our lab. We do what's called a phosphorus fractionation. I've referenced this before, but actually is a way of teasing out what the phosphorus is bound to. So we have this iron-bound phosphorus fraction that's on the far left, calcium-bound phosphorus fractionation, aluminum-bound phosphorus, and an organically bound phosphorus fraction. We've talked a lot about the iron-bound phosphorus, and I've also kind of alluded to why the organic-bound phosphorus fraction is very important for shallow lakes, but it is the iron-bound phosphorus fraction, the organically bound phosphorus fraction that contribute to internal loading. Calcium-bound phosphorus is very inert and stable, and so is aluminum-bound phosphorus as long as pH doesn't get super high. This is important, and if you look at the range of lakes, we did that study, the 2020 study that I referenced previously. This is a graph. I'll go through kind of slowly here. So this is a graph of the lakes that we studied, and here's the phosphorus fractions, concentrations. Looks like the top 4 centimeters of the surface of the lake sediment. So that's like right here, this top little area here, which is really the most active layer in the sediment in the bottom of a lake. So typically when you put the sediment core in, just briefly here, this is where the water column and the sediment basically interact. And then this is deeper down to the lake bottom sediment. So I'm looking at just the top layer here. And if you look, you see that there's kind of interesting actually. Coleman Lake has a good amount of iron-bound phosphorus and then less organic-bound phosphorus. We did a Coleman Lake alum treatment, and this is you can tell why we did it. It was because we're trying to attack that iron-bound phosphorus fraction. And then you can see in Battle Creek Lake, it's very similar. In Beaver Lake, and then it starts to switch. You can see that there's much less iron-bound phosphorus compared to the organic-bound phosphorus fraction, less in Lake Owasso, Lake Emily, Bennett, and also in Round Lake. So you can see that there's quite a good dispersion of different compositions among these lakes. And I think I mentioned before that differential also kind of pushes us to think about how we're going to deal with internal load differently for those different situations with different kind of phosphorus compounds.
Pete?
Yeah.
Sorry, on that slide, you moved on. I just wanted to know, Round Lake, I believe there are 2 Round Lakes. There's one in Little Canada and there's one next to Phelan. Which Round Lake?
I think it's the one next to Phelan, I believe.
All right, thanks.
I know I talked about this before, but I'm going to talk about it one more time because we got a couple steps here I just want to introduce. One is iron-bound phosphorus. So it is mostly insoluble, like it's stuck solidly in the lake bottom sediments. It doesn't stay in the water column. But when bacteria respire, they tend to shoot off this electron, which then breaks this bond, and then it makes a compound called iron plus 2, which is a reduced compound, and phosphorus. This is internal loading. This is typically what happens at the bottom of the lake. Like this phosphorus molecule, now it's free to do whatever it wants to, and it fuses up into the water column and causes algal blooms. The organic phosphorus fraction is a little bit different. Like it's in the sediments and it's big. And then over time, there's fermentation process occurs. And the fermentation process has enzymes, and they basically break down that big organic phosphorus molecule into organic phosphorus molecules that are smaller. And then they have a chance to become soluble. They can then also go up into the water column because they're smaller, and they can become dissolved. And in the water column, that organic P compound then breaks down again with further decomposition, and algae can pick that up eventually. And also algae can use this organic phosphorus molecule to some degree. So we have like two pathways of internal loading here, depending upon what chemical composition is most dominant in your sediments. That's why I showed that previous graph, right? So those are the two pathways of internal loading in Ramsey-Washington shallow lakes. And so I showed this graph last time about Coleman Lake, how after the alum treatment in 2010, it was super successful, and phosphorus concentrations were low enough that they were meeting the shallow lake standard of 60 micrograms per liter total phosphorus. And then, recently we've had this kind of reversion to where we were, and maybe reversion to worse than we were previously. And there were some questions like, is this alum treatment expired? And I may have said yes, but I'm going to bring some evidence to this meeting about what's going on. So I brought some data from cores we collected in 2020 and also some more recently, but the 2022 cores really illustrate what's going on. So again, going back to the sediment core concept, I drew this line here to kind of connect this image of the sediment core to the graph, and the graph shows concentrations of stuff, aluminum-bound phosphorus with depth into the sediment. So as this graph goes down, just imagine it's also going down to the sediment core, so you can kind of see what's going on here. And it's not too far from actually the reality. Like this is about 20 centimeters of sediment core, and this is about 20 centimeters in the graph. So it matches up fairly well. What you can see is that there's some spikes here. There's some spikes here. And this graph, there's some spikes here, also here. So there's some distribution of stuff going on. In this leftmost graph, what we have is extracted aluminum. So that's kind of a signal of where the alum treatment ended up in Coleman Lake. So what you can see is, oops, I seem to lost my cursor briefly. What you can see is that the aluminum concentration is elevated, but it's kind of seemed to be sinking a little bit. I guess it's not quite the right word, but I'd say migrating downward into the lake bottom sediment. So rather than being on the surface when we first applied it, it's kind of moved down into the sediment. These are different locations in Coleman Lake, and the different locations got different kind of amounts of aluminum. And also what happens is it tends to migrate to the deeper areas of the lake. But anyhow, you can see some signals here of the old alum treatment. But what you notice is a lot of it is migrated downward. And like I mentioned, is the iron-bound phosphorus molecule is the one that's most reactive to aluminum. I think I mentioned this in the previous discussion, is that iron-bound phosphorus, when it comes in contact with aluminum, the phosphorus prefers to be with the aluminum, makes this aluminum-bound phosphorus bound, this aluminum-bound phosphorus compound, I should say. And if you go to the right graph, you can see that's kind of showing up. We can actually I showed that fractionation steps. You can do iron bound, calcium bound, aluminum bound, organic bound phosphorus, and that fractionation procedure I showed, that's a chemical kind of fractionation procedure. This is the outcome of that procedure. And so you can check to see, oh yeah, here's the green line for the monoaluminum in your sediment, and it did form a lot of aluminum bound phosphorus. And same with the orange line. There's aluminum. Here's how much aluminum bound phosphorus it formed. And even this, sorry, I didn't do a great job coloring here, but this orange thing matches up with the white. You can see. So you can see that adding the aluminum, you did form the aluminum bound phosphorus molecule, but it's not necessarily at the surface anymore. It's migrated downward, and it's probably pulled a lot of the phosphorus with it.
Keith, can I ask a question on that graphic?
Absolutely.
Does that imply that there's still viable aluminum at depth of 10 or 10 centimeters, or when you combine these two, does that mean that the aluminum in theory has been consumed fully? I was trying to understand that a little bit.
So this is a little bit of a conundrum of this field. The current I would say common knowledge, or however you want to call it, is that eventually this aluminum gets old. It starts transforming into other molecules, and it kind of stops binding iron-bound phosphorus. They call it aluminum aging. Apparently, it starts becoming a compound called gibbsite, and then eventually becomes clay. And I don't really know how long it takes for that process to occur, but I think there's a general consensus that there is a time frame in which aluminum begins to stop binding phosphorus and loses its ability to do so. So it's pretty much used up down there. It's done its job. It's formed a lot of aluminum bound phosphorus, as you can see in this right graph. If I get my cursor back here. Let me go back. Just trying to get my cursor back. So you can see it's done its job. It's taken iron bound phosphorus. Sorry about that. It's converted to aluminum bound phosphorus, and it's now in there, and it's sunk. It's did its job. And I'll show you the next graph. You'll kind of see. I almost believe the results. So just look at it with a little bit of a jaundiced eye, but I think it's probably right because there's some old data I'm looking at here. But it's grabbed a lot of that phosphorus and immobilized. It's just no longer at the surface, right? So here's 2023. We graphed it. We took some more sediment cores. You can see that there's aluminum bound phosphorus here again. It's not as clean of a story as I showed in the previous graph, like, oh, here's the peak here, and maybe there's a peak here, or what's going on. But the main story is the other fractionation compound, iron-bound phosphorus, is now elevated at the surface. So this yellow bar here is basically is a demarcation between no internal loading, internal loading. So any concentrations greater than this, you're going to start getting internal loading potential from the sediment. So now all the concentrations are essentially above that potential. These are not huge. They're still elevated over no internal loading. These are getting quite big now. So it's become the point where the phosphorus accumulation is high enough that it will definitely cause internal loading in Coleman Lake. If I look, so it looks like, yeah, there's a lot of phosphorus in there. If I look at some really old data from 2005, we have, I think, 4 cores across Coleman Lake, and then we have 5 cores across Coleman Lake. And you compare them. I did a average by sediment depth. So I basically averaged across 4 different cores and 5 different cores to try to get a feel for what's going on. And my conclusion here is that the sediment is basically, the concentration basically returned to where they were pre-alum treatment. The surface, it looks like that buried alum is still keeping iron-bound phosphorus low at depth compared to where it was before the treatment. This is where I said keep it with a jaundiced eye. I think it makes sense to me. I think what makes most sense is we're back to where we were essentially before the alum treatment. But this is 2005, right? So I had to dig into our files and look at that. I was a part of that coring campaign, but you take 4 cores across the lake, right? It's a very big lake, and so you're averaging these things, and so there is some spatial variability to consider. But I think the story is it's done, and And we can expect that internal loading would return and should be returning to Coleman Lake. And so that was basically what I tell there. Any questions about the Coleman Lake alum treatment or what I've talked about there? I have conclusions at the end of what I'm recommending, but before I move on to Wakefield Lake, I want to give people a chance to ask some questions.
I have a general question, but I wanted to save it for Wakefield because it's more on the internal loading ones. But I'll just ask it for Coleman and Wakefield. As we look at preventative measures, alum treats kind of immediately these phosphorus builds. Are we also building out a plan to engage residents in terms of ensuring that the organic phosphorus that finds its way with grass clippings and etc. Also is managed?
In Coleman Lake?
In Coleman, do you know, Tina?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of a continual
Yeah.
education program. We've done a lot in the external load, so there is kind of a separate component,
Yeah.
right? So it does help also with that external load that comes in, but we've done a lot of projects upstream to address the external load.
Yeah.
And then we do have residents that live along the shore.
That's what
a lot of them have natural shorelines, so it's, we've worked with a lot of the residents on that lake already, and it's only on one side of it, so it's a pretty natural system. But.
And I don't want to jump to the conclusion, but it seems like if we are going to recommend an alum treatment for this particular lake, is there another campaign that can start in conjunction with that, just to remind people that they do play a role in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, yes, the answer is yes.
Perfect. I'm very happy with that answer. Okay, I'm done. Thank you, Keith.
Certainly. So I think the Coleman Lake story is pretty concrete. We know what the benefits are of alum treatment. This next one, Wakefield, I would consider to be a conversation beginning to talk about it. So the first thing is there internal loading in Wakefield Lake? And for me, the way I look at things is looking for a condition where you have a steadily increasing or a spiking or concentration of phosphorus in midsummer leading up to it. There may have been some rain here that flushed out the lake. You can see I put precipitation here. The blue line is simply total phosphorus in the surface of the water. So that was 2022, which was a pretty dry year in general with some events later in the season. So this shows a really good interplay between the internal loading that occurs and then the flushing out of Wakefield Lake that occurs. And so it's a pretty dynamic system of the external and internal loads that are going on. And then in 2016, this is a really nice example of how the system's working. This blue line here is the bottom of Wakefield Lake at around 2 meters, and this is the surface sample. So you see this general marching up in concentration, which shows you internal loading, and which is really nice. You can also see that there's obviously some exchange going on between what's happening in the bottom and the surface, and so phosphorus is coming up. We have a drop here. I'm just guessing we had some kind of rate event that flushed out things, maybe disturbed the water column and caused some mixing. But the internal load started to try to keep going on. And then finally, with the colder weather, which tends to shut off, dissolve oxygen recovers to the water column, and water column temperatures get cooler and internal load shuts off. I just want to make sure we all are aware there's a whole story. It's a pretty dynamic system. So I looked at 2023 data, total phosphorus concentrations were high in the spring. So ice cover, internal loading in the winter, that happens. And so the spring concentrations can be high, reflecting internal load that actually happens during the winter time. And then it seems like the concentration was dropping all year long. Internal load didn't seem as obvious. Looking at aerial photos and near map and Google Earth, you can see there's a really healthy population of aquatic plants this year that seemed out of the normal. So it's possible that they were helping to mitigate what was going on in 2023 with that extremely dry year. And so it's there for the most part. most years you see this consistently increasing internal load. Some years it stays high and then it stays high all year long. I'm not exactly sure why. So it's a pretty dynamic system. So internal load control in Wakefield Lake targets these certain conditions. Like it's not like, Coleman Lake, you expect it to happen every year pretty much, right? Whereas this lake is a little more dynamic in terms of flushing, aquatic plants. So, but you do have this internal load signature that's definitely influencing the concentrations and pushing them up every single year. You can see from that previous graph, like you can see how the internal load is dominating what happens in the surface. So I just want to make everybody clear that there's some variability. And so if internal loads were controlled, the response is going to be a little bit variable as well. I talked about that phosphorus fractionation at the beginning, organic phosphorus versus iron-bound phosphorus. And Wakefield Lake is one of those that has the higher concentration organic phosphorus in the lake bottom sediment. This is the top 4 centimeters of that sediment core. And so what you see is you have a lot of organic phosphorus, not a whole heck of a lot of iron, enough to cause some internal loading, but I'm guessing that the organic phosphorus is also contributing quite heavily to that system. So the iron-bound phosphorus, you could treat this with alum and immobilize this, and it would do a good job in reducing internal load that's coming from there. You're going to have this residual amount of organic phosphorus in the sediment. To me, it's not entirely sure whether or not if you did alum treatment, if it would be entirely effective. I think it would be partially effective. And that whole concept of alum aging, which we talked about just previously, this organic P decays over a longer period of time. And will that aluminum be available to bind it once it decays? It's possible it will. So it's one approach people are taking is doing alum treatments for organic phosphorus dominated lakes, and then another one in 5 years. So they do them a little more frequently to add kind of like microdoses essentially of alum treatments over time to start grabbing that organic P when it decays, and eventually you've kind of bound it all up in aluminum bound phosphorus over time. That's one approach. And it's just being kind of executed by certain individuals. And it could be successful, it's kind of unknown if that's going to work. Another thing that's going on in Wakefield, I should say in all Ramsey-Washington lakes, is there seems to be this very strong relationship between the amount of iron in your lake and how much iron-bound phosphorus you produce. So this is all the sediment cores that I talked about in that 2020, or alluded to in the 2020 study, I should say, briefly shows that if you have more iron, you're going to have more iron-bound phosphorus, which is pretty interesting. And what I'm also taking from that is if you add more iron, you could make more iron-bound phosphorus. So it's a hypothesis of mine that you could potentially, take this organic bound phosphorus and convert it to iron-bound phosphorus if you want to. And if you go back to one of my earlier slides, well, that's a little bit risky because if you have bacterial aspiration, and then the iron-bound phosphorus can also dissolve into the water column. So one approach is to add enough iron, but also add devices that can pump oxygen into your water column of your lake to make sure that the iron-bound phosphorus that you formed here stays formed as that. So that's what aeration. So if you hear about anyone trying to use aeration to prevent internal loading, you're essentially trying to keep the iron-bound phosphorus stuck in the sediment and insoluble. We did this shallow lake aeration study, and I think the outcome was this probably will work, but trying to get air into shallow lakes sediments is really challenging. Another approach is called this oxygen saturation technology, where
Keith,
go ahead.
Really quick pause. Did you have any comments that you wanted us to consider as you look forward to the agenda?
No, I was looking forward to the rest of this, but I did read it over in the docket, so I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
That has to be.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Please continue, Keith.
Certainly. So this is a kind of a new emerging technology where you actually put this device in your lake and it pulls in water with a pump it adds direct oxygen into these chambers, and it saturates the oxygen in your this water, and then it pumps it back out into your lake. So it actually sits, for example, in your lake, and it floods the bottom of your lake with high oxygen water. And I should say highly saturated water. So it's at like 10 to 15 milligrams per liter. So it's a high concentration. So it's able to push the oxygen into the sediments.
Does that run year round? Keith?
I'm sorry?
Is that run year round or is that mainly in the summer?
That's a really good point. The idea is to run it all year round, to run it under the ice, and so that you are essentially oxidizing all of the sediment elements all winter long. And so you oxidize that, and you keep on running in the summer, but eventually the system will lose control. Like the amount of oxygen demand in the sediments will overwhelm the system, and you kind of want it to. So you size it to oversize your system, so you just barely keep up. And the idea is that you do run this all winter long. Another thing you'll notice about this system is it's not tiny, right? It will, here's a 4-foot lake. It's not going to fit into a 4-foot lake, so it's not going to work in a really shallow lake. It's going to just barely work in a lake like Wakefield, that's about 8 feet at the maximum depth. And there's some discussions with the manufacturer I had actually just before this presentation to talk about customizing this and what they can do, and I think there's a little more discussion to be had about sizing these things. But you'd have, for Wakefield Lake, if you were going to do this approach, you'd have 2 of these in your lake, in Wakefield Lake. So that's just it. Go ahead. Sorry.
On that, so as we looked at the loading graphics, I think you had implied the deeper the cores in the deeper parts of the lake show more loading. Is
right.
that true with internal loading as well, Keith? And so would these be aligned to like the deeper parts of the lake only, or is there? Just curious.
Definitely. So it would be designed to oxygenate essentially the deeper regions of Wakefield, and I just trace it out. It's about 8 to 10 acres of the total acreage, which is about 23 acres of Lakefield. So it will be designed to basically oxygenate that deeper hole of the lake.
Deeper hole, and it oxygenates the square areas effectively.
Right, and in the winter, obviously the whole water column is mixed, so it's going to probably spread out among the whole entire thing. But so this is go ahead. Is there a question?
Yeah. I assume these run by electricity?
They run by electricity.
Yeah, so somehow you have to get power to them.
You do have to get power to them. So that's why I said this is the beginning of a conversation, because we haven't gone through all the engineering steps to see what kind of building might be needed or et cetera. But there's essentially a electrical cable. I understand they call it a marine electrical cable that hooks up to one of these things and powers a pump. The oxygen is delivered from shore in a tube, and there's a small system about the size of my office here, as you can see. It can fit into the compressor, all the stuff that makes the oxygen on shore. So this system actually filters atmospheric air and takes out just the oxygen and kicks out the rest, and then puts it down the bottom of the lake. So this system is pretty self-contained in terms of operation. But I think there are obviously some great things about this, and there are some things to consider as well, right? So it is an operating thing that's going to need maintenance. It also is going to be, somewhat in the water column, right? It's like, it's not necessarily going to be visible, but it's going to be there. And, a canoeer might go, hey, look at this couple of things that are in my lake. And it's possible residents don't like that idea of having that, because it is kind of big and potentially observable, essentially. it has some other benefits in terms of fisheries, in terms of it's going to keep things oxygenated. So the bottom of the lake is going to be oxygenated. It's designed not to destratify the lake, because it's just pumping in the same temperature water here and pumping it out. So it's trying to not destratify. It won't make thin ice, which is an important thing. But the tricky thing is it can't freeze in either. So it has to be, there's gonna be some discussion with the manufacturer to make sure that they can make this short enough for us that it's not gonna freeze in the ice and get ruined. So there's a lot of benefits and some other things to think about. Attacking that organic phosphorus fraction, which is pretty prevalent among Ramsey-Washington shallow lakes, is challenging. So this would be considered an experimental approach to start thinking about how you do it. Some people might call it more sustainable, because we're not adding aluminum, which is, from bauxite ore, et cetera. And potentially this is electricity that could be powered by renewable energy if needed. So there's a lot of things to consider in terms of whether this approach is right.
Was the shallow lake study that Paul closed, right? The naturalist programs, did that look at phosphorus at all?
I'm sorry, what is that?
Sorry, we did a shallow lake aeration study.
Yeah, that Keith did. That
Keith
he
did.
presented on.
Thank you
Yeah,
for me, Keith.
Yeah, on stack.
Yeah. Was that enough of an experiment to say this is?
That's why he's suggesting this now, is because it came out of that study.
Would this
or
be
that
like a second?
discussion came out of this study.
I was trying to rectify what I heard him say. So the unit adjustments would be the experimental piece that he's talking to the company about, or would?
Using it would be experimental.
I think the experimental piece is how are we going to get it to fit in there? How's it going to operate? I think it'll be really
challenge
Sorry.
at that point. The experiment's the engineering challenge of actually deploying it and making it work. It's not so much that this relationship works. I'm just trying to break it out more clearly.
I think it's all a little new. There's apparently 8 of these systems around the country. There's one in Massachusetts where I really want to go visit. I have gone to conferences, and direct oxygen is not a new concept. It's used in different ways. It's been mostly used in deep lakes because deep lakes are stratified and the bottom stays unmixed with the surface for the most part, except some leaking around the edges. But so it's been a very effective way of reducing internal loading for drinking water and for recreation for internal load controls. But shallow lakes is a little bit different story, right? They're a little more challenging. So we'll design this. We design it. We add 2 of these in and say, okay, we're doing that. But Wakefield Lake has a lot of exchange in the water column. Is the oxygen going to stay down there? How's the winter oxygenation? There's a lot of things that are a little bit different with these shallow lakes. I think that's the experimental part. Engineering plus how's it gonna practically work to oxygenate the sediments?
Does Wakefield allow for boats?
No.
No, there's.
Pardon me?
Wasn't sure.
It
No,
doesn't have a boat landing.
Doesn't
but
have a boat
Okay.
Sometimes people might have boats, but it's mostly a canoe or kayak.
that's what I was curious about, just thinking about props and that kind of stuff.
It
And
does.
this does protrude out. I know props don't know the same.
And another question that I was gonna raise, or a contrast between the 2 lakes. Coleman quite certainly has fish, carp, lots of experience with trying to control carp, and Coleman is part of the chain of lakes, but nonetheless, there are still carp in that lake. Wakefield does have some, I believe the DNR has introduced some, put and take, panfish mainly, but for the most part, no carp. The fish community is probably very different.
Did you, was that a question? Are you?
Well, I guess the question is, to what extent have you considered the role of fish and how either alum or this oxygen saturation and the added iron combination, how fish may or may not affect functionality?
So certainly, carp mucking around can have an impact on how that aluminum eventually migrates down, like I showed in those graphs. I don't think when we did the alum treatment 2010, I don't think the district was at all done with all their carp removal efforts. They were ongoing during, the 2010s, the 2020s, and it was pretty effective. One thing about alum is you do actually want it to mix in. You don't want it to just sit on the surface. You want it to mix in and react with stuff. So I think initially having some fish activity and movement and mixing is good. If you have a ton of fish activity, I think it could cause it to migrate faster. But we saw that it lasted for about 10 years, and I don't think it would. I think it'd be reasonable to make the same assumption.
Yeah, we're just managing, the carp populations to be under the thresholds that we're shooting for, so.
What kind of next steps should we look at, given the recommendations? The next slide.
Yeah, I think, and Keith, did you have more you wanted to add, or is that?
Nope, I just had that.
Yeah, yeah, so I think, as Keith has here recommending an alum treatment, I wanted you to hear this now so that as we move into budgeting, we can think about what we might need for 2025. So I would like to hear if the board is supportive of at least moving forward with taking next steps for the alum treatment in particular. And then also, if you're interested in us keep exploring, we're not to the point where we're like budgeting for a project.
Would it be another experimental project that we run?
For Wakefield, I think I would suggest it be under our research budget, and that we, direct staff, or you would direct staff to keep exploring, maybe have a scope summary that looks at what it would take, what additional information is needed, and how do we kind of hone in on what the budget would be, what the impacts would be, and move forward with that. But that, again, it does impact budget for 2025, but it might not be the same implementation schedule.
So just making sure that I'm connecting. So no motion on the alum treatment. We want to see engaged support.
Yeah, I think for both Coleman and Wakefield.
Perfect. That's what I want to double check.
Get support from the board that we continue to explore these options, and then you would see things come forward to you. For instance, for Coleman, you would see it in your budget discussions as we move forward, and then for Wakefield as well, you'd see some budget numbers under our research program, and scoping out what that looks like moving forward. Does that seem reasonable, Keith?
Absolutely.
What do y'all think?
Yeah, I have no problem with an alum treatment. Coleman Lake, the evidence seems to suggest it's time. But I'm also very supportive of this direct oxygen system and exploring that further. My one question on it seems like it's a very vertical, piece of machinery. I mean, you said you'd kind of approach them, but my mind just goes to, why can't they engineer it to be horizontal? Because it's just forced air into a pump. I don't know. But just to make it even more suitable for shallow lakes. And the Wakefield, I think, would be a great experimental stage for something like this. If it comes out that this would be an appropriate measure. So yeah, I'd be very supportive of, because we've got a lot of lakes like Wakefield where there's a lot of the organically bound phosphorus, and if this is effective in controlling that, it's of great interest to me anyways.
What do you think, Stephanie and Mark?
I think that Coleman alum treatment probably makes a lot of sense. The Wakefield, I'm not necessarily against it, but I guess I have some more questions, some more technical questions, and I probably would like to either have some side conversations or even kind of dig in. So I'd have a little bit more reservation about that.
Yeah, so I have a very low understanding of the differences between the lakes. So you presented some time back the oxygenation aeration for Jarvis Mill and Bennett, and the Jarvis Mill had some issues, and I don't know how that compares with Wakefield. What gives you I'm not sure how those systems are different enough. And so that's why I still don't know how I feel about this iron and direct oxygen system. Just out of curiosity, how tall is that unit?
That unit there is like 6.5 feet high.
How high?
6.5 feet. So it's as tall as Brad.
Plus it requires equipment on the side.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why.
Well, and just to maybe clarify a little bit, that Jarvis Mill Pond, that was just a regular aerator, like you might see in regular ponds kind of systems, or it's not the same, it wasn't the same.
Well, the outcome was a little bit different. That we were
Well, and
exploring.
Jarvis Mill Pond is like a wetland system, it's not a lake like.
I do think that there's definitely some interesting questions in terms of, is this the only piece of equipment that we would use for direct air? Like, what other technologies are out there? I'd be curious about. I mean, those are, I'm in support of continuing to investigate with caution and trying to understand. From what I Googled around with the direct air, it does seem like it's being more widely used. So I'm kind of excited to see it work, but I'm curious about where all the other technology is. And also, if you are going to set up something, to build off of what you said, Stephanie, there were some hurdles that we had to overcome with the other aeration studies. So ensuring that study and the data that we collect is really robust, and we have the right partnerships in place, would be the other way I'd say it. For a more in-depth study and effectiveness would be a recommendation that I would suggest too.
May I ask, what is the average depth of Wakefield?
Would you say, Keith, 8 feet?
Yeah, it's like
8 feet maximum depth.
8 max.
There's a big 7-foot.
You would see it if anybody took out and did a hole in the winter, you'd definitely, it'd be like right there.
That is the challenge of it. The other approach is called a side stream aerator. You pull the water onto land, aerate it, and push it back into the lake. That is also done, but the challenge there is you aerate the water. It has iron in it, and the iron then flocculates and can clog things up. So there's nothing that's perfect design. I was talking to the manufacturer. He goes, well, you could just build a big old chamber and stick it down there off the lake. And I'm like, well, I don't think we want to build a chamber. So there's always things to consider and evaluate that we could look at to give more options.
I'll just say, kind of the normal process we would do, this is essentially a conceptual design. We would move into more of a feasibility study. We would look at more of the details and what it would take to actually get this input in place and put some costs to it. And then before you get into the design process, you have to say, okay, that makes sense. This is a recommendation. We're going to go this approach, and we start building the design. So we're quite a ways from the actual design of implementing this in Wakefield. But if you are supportive, I think the next step would be a feasibility study to look at some of these issues that you brought up, cost them out, and see which is most practical. To your point, Stephanie, we don't want this sticking out of the water and be an attractive nuisance for people maybe canoeing or somebody wanting to damage it. Some of those things can be worked out through the next stage of the study.
So that's what I was hoping to build on, because I share some, maybe not the same questions as Mark does, but I'm very curious in terms of like what's the balance of the lake and what is that kind of stuff. If you take it through a little bit more design, and we have some of those details fleshed out, maybe we can ask more targeted questions.
For sure.
And maybe I should say, just to add to the discussion, some of my hesitancy, I think some of these shallow lakes, Wakefield is probably a little bit more on the lake side, but some of them kind of almost teeter on, is it really a lake, is it almost a, wetland, and, we got Bennett, we've got Casey, we've got Beaver, we've got Wakefield, and there's a whole bunch around, for that matter, of these shallow lakes, home lakes. And from an aquatic life standpoint, I guess is part of what I'm thinking, and certain people probably immediately think about fish, but fish have to eat things. And so I've got invertebrate communities, you've got plant communities, and some of those may be adapted to some, low oxygen type habitats. And if you're going to really push the oxygenation? Is that gonna teeter or, stressing some of those parts of the system in the interest of just a chemical kind of process? And so that's some of my hesitance.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Those are things that we can address or, talk about as we go, get into. more
Define the
detail.
parameters of the feasibility study.
I mean, there'll be permitting and things that we'd have to address with that too.
I mean, is it fair to say that the feeling of the board is that we are optimistic, tentatively optimistic? And for us,
Well, curious
Curious.
enough to move forward to continue the discussion.
Yeah, because I would certainly.
What is the
think Brad was suggesting that it's maybe worth, going for a little bit further conceptual, 30% kind of design. At this point, we're not
yeah.
committing ourselves. It's probably information gathering is what I would say.
So then would Barb come up with a proposal and then we
Yeah,
can?
there would be a scope summary created and you would see that in the package.
Just, so it sounds like we're curious. Please continue. And then if you don't mind, let's transition to the operation plans. This one should be,
Oh, yes, that was just a scope summary for you, for your review. There's no presentation in that one.
that's what I just wanted to double check on. Right.
Yep. So that's a project that BAR is starting to work on, and just wanted you to be aware that they're working on that.
And updates are coming through in the program or plan, which are already there.
Thank you,
Keith,
Steve.
man, thanks.
My pleasure. Nice to see you all again. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Bye.
So board discussion topics, we moved that down to accommodate Matt's schedule. Any comments that we would like to bring up now? I had a curiosity and they might be not in our jurisdiction, so I do want to bring up just one topic. I've been with all the water that's coming through. There's what looks like they're building kind of retention pool near a church off of Rice Street. Is that within our district?
Yeah,
Was that-
Hutchin, warehouse.
Thank you,
Yeah.
yes.
Yep, yep, that was part of that's a permitted project.
When's the last time we've gone through and inspected that? There's a lot of water on top of it.
Like Hutchin Road, the Ramsey County contract, the fault.
Oh, Mary left.
I can,
We can-
if you don't mind, I'm just kind of.
I know she goes out there.
Yeah,
she's got.
at least every other week.
Yeah.
I wish I had Mark's eyes because I drive through that sea culvert area fairly frequently, and I've about the, but yeah, okay. That was the only thing I wanted to bring up in terms of what we see. And I guess the other piece is it sounds like we are engaging with constituents around Wabasso Lake. I had a couple of residents who work at the company just come and talk, and so we've addressed some of their questions. Just looking at.
I haven't heard from them in a while. So
I think Paul had.
Okay, no, so they're
I saw
interacting
an
with
email.
Paul.
Yes.
Yeah, there was some back and forth. They were talking about reaching out to a different agency, and I just wanted to make sure that we've done what we can for them.
Maybe just a curiosity, because of the recent intense downpours, has that impacted how effective their construction methodologies are to contain what they're supposed to contain?
Yeah, certainly. It helps us identify deficiencies, but some very intense rain events. I don't think we've received a couple 2 and 2+ inch events that we have experienced in the past, rain events that are so large and so drastic that some of these practices do fail. And you saw that with the discharges that we reported in the enforcement report. But yeah, there is such a thing as a rain event that's too strong and too fast.
Well, I'm just asking, it's impacted my own yard.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering whether or not we have to make sure that people are doing maybe more.
Yeah, once we identify a deficiency, they're gonna be responsible for doing even more, kind of like when we discussed with the Ramsey County adding different practices to address that problem with the intersection and the discharge. Yeah, so each site has a stormwater pollution prevention plan. Those are very fluid documents that are changing all the time. Yeah. Mhm.
Any other board discussion topics? Awesome. Let's go to the administrative report.
Okay. I've got my meetings attended as well as upcoming meetings. I wanted to point out as a reminder, it was mentioned earlier that the July board meeting had been moved previously. We approved a move to July 10th, so it's a week later. So your packet will come. But the meeting has been moved to the 10th. Also wanted just to mention, and I sent you all an email this week about the watershed summer tour as well. So please let me know as soon as you can if you would like to be registered for that. And otherwise, I've got the staff anniversaries for your information. The action log, what Minnesota watersheds update. Again, just the tour is on there. The staff organizational chart, we met Ashley, as well as we saw that we did our official move to the program managers recently, so that was just for your information as well.
I like that has been something that we've talked about for a couple of years. Another quick thing about administrative pictures, do we want to talk about that at all?
Oh, you got the email from Lauren
Yeah.
as well about picture day?
Okay.
Yes, so you can respond to her and let her know if you're able to keep her. So you have. Yes, so you can respond to Lauren if you're able to.
Awesome. And then the only, we had talked about creating a kind of a list or backlog for the management report. Where is that stored out of curiosity?
We don't have that put together yet.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
And
that'll
we were thinking of putting that in the project planning section.
In the PSR, the project status report,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a potential place where I could do something similar to the action log as well.
And did anyone go to Waterfest? I
Yes.
apologize, I did not.
Yes.
How was the CAC stuff? Was it well attended, do you think?
Yeah, I worked
I'm curious about the chloride
There
stuff.
were a number of people that, were wandering by, straight engaged folks, so I thought attendance overall was very good from my vantage. Haven't been there a few times in the past. And yeah, people certainly seem engaged, and especially on the kind of more salt side of things.
Yeah.
Not a lot of technical discussion as much as the kids were having fun playing the game.
Good.
Kind of encouraging them to step forward. And, but yeah, good.
It was a passport staff too, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was a passport.
Passport things, my kids
Yeah.
adore.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you have numbers or?
No, not yet. I mean, I know she's compiling all the data.
Hopefully next week or next.
Yeah, probably, I think, it's hard to get numbers, so we did surveying and we did, we had to sign a waiver for wristbands for some of the activities, so we had some of those numbers and then she tries to make sense. But it seemed like a busy day.
Like over 1,500 at the photo booth.
Yeah, 1,500 participants.
Yeah, or photos or.
Yeah, pictures that we're taking.
Yeah.
So and those pictures will be posted on our things.
Yeah, we'll see how I know she's gonna start to share some of that.
All right, sweet. No questions on organizational chart. As we get to know the staff better over the years, finding some ways to celebrate those interns would be great. I like how they've done presentations. It's always good.
Yep, we'll keep
That'd be
doing
great.
that.
I really liked, I know it's particularly in the natural resources section, but I think some of the others.
Yeah.
Areas as well, but how a little write-up, of these interns, that's really informative and kind of fun.
Yeah, it's like-
Where people are coming from and where they're at in their career and how this might fit in that whole puzzle and, yeah.
I agree, I enjoy that too, yeah. Let's jump to the project and program status. I only have a couple flagged that I'm curious about. I figure we'll start with A and I'll keep jumping through and then you guys stop me if you have one between the ones I jump through. This is just an educational piece for me, the Ames Lake Area Flood Reduction Planning. I'm not as familiar with the HRA and St. Paul process for those. Is that recorded somewhere just for offline education?
It's not really
It's not really,
it's just, it's their land that we're wanting to use
Understood,
for
okay.
the project, and so we have to work. So I'm not sure what their process is,
Okay.
but we're waiting for that.
so this is just
essentially to
like,
move forward.
if you were high level summary, we're working with the landowner and
Yeah.
they're going through the HRA and.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
the HRA is the landowner,
Pretty.
so they're the ones that we need to make sure we get our approvals.
Great. My next comment is on F.
Oh, can I ask on C?
Yes. of
Where
course.
is Snake Creek?
So at the very southern end of our district,
I don't know if it's really well labeled.
it's not, it's,
I had somebody show me, yeah.
I think even Creek is
Yes, right.
is a stretch, so it's a pretty small.
I can look it up.
Okay.
Doesn't it feed into fish? What is it?
No, it goes
No,
right
it's
to
separate
the
from fish.
river.
Directly to the
Okay.
river?
I was looking for it on the map.
Yeah, it's south of Fish Creek,
Okay.
right, yeah,
Yes. it's
kind of
all-
around
Yeah, I had to
61,
Google it.
just right before you get to
Somebody who had labeled it.
490.
So the old basic Bailey Nursery potted plant field, there was a pond that was on the upstream end of it, that was kind of the headwaters of the ravine of the creek. I guess.
Is that your double driveway? Is that what?
It would be south of Double Drive.
Yeah, separate
Okay.
from that even.
Okay.
It's tiny.
Yeah. I don't really know if it was in our last plan, I think we just not discovered it because it was the city that was operating it. For a
Thanks.
Good question. It took a while to find it. So jumping to F, I'm curious, the Maplewood Mall, last I recall, conversations that property's changed hands a few times. Have we worked with that new property owners in terms of some of the stuff that are described here?
Correct.
Okay, and this was part of this is one of the stops in the summer tour, right?
Correct, yes, yep. So there is a new management company out there. We've been in contact, and they were notified of this process, so we'll be in touch with them once we figure out what else.
That actually was a question that was raised to me at Waterfest. I was asked kind of if we had any idea of future of Maplewood Mall in a sense, and that was the context. And obviously, I don't think anybody has crystal ball, but it doesn't seem to be as much use as maybe there has been in the past, but we put a lot of investment in the mall. And as that property might change use or ownership or whatever over the course of time, how we might consider some of that investment in terms of easement isn't the right terms, but in terms of agreements that we had with Simon's, the original, how do we carry that forward? And so it was kind of an interesting conversation. So I just throw it out here, not necessarily as a question, but just something to be thinking about.
Definitely, always, yeah.
It's a good comment, it's a similar comment. I am curious, my next question's on J, and this is just a general one. Target store retrofit when we were talking to the near property, and so when I read it, it may be not pertaining to the J, but maybe overall process. As we look at how we engage the public and get some of the feedback and the property owners and some of the feedback, are we doing it early enough, do y'all think?
Oh,
I
yeah, for
think
this
so,
project.
For this particular one,
This,
okay.
yes, this one in particular, I mean, we met with Muir Properties first,
Yeah.
and they said, just deal with Target. And then there was
Some back and forth.
some, yes, back
Yeah.
and forth, that's it.
Between Muir and
Muir and
Target.
Target, yes.
So
yes.
they may not have had the best
Oh,
communication.
okay.
Yes.
We had good communications, I would say, with both, but they didn't. have with
Do
each
we like, I assume we don't facilitate that communication, but do we provide at least a platform where maybe a collision might happen between those two? Not collision, but like some sort of meeting.
Yes, I would say usually we are kind of that.
Glue is.
Yes, this was a weird one because they have their own ownership things and so we were told that. This is who we should talk to.
Understood.
And
Yeah.
we were also
They set the
told that,
boundaries.
you know, when we were, you know, saying, oh, are you sure we're good with this, this and this, Target was like, yes, we're good.
Yeah.
And then found out they were not.
Okay.
They were not.
Yes, but thankfully Target's covering that cost as you saw.
Yeah, which I don't have a problem with the change order and the
Yeah.
requests that came
Yeah.
through. I was just, when I was thinking about this and considering some other encounters that we've had with property owners, like it makes me question if we're engaging
I
them.
think it's always a learning experience too.
Yes.
So just FYI, it has appeared in Nextdoor, what is happening
No.
in the Target in the
Oh,
mall. So someone did see the sign and so that's another watershed improvement, very similar to what happened at the other store.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Good.
Other, but there have been other.
You
things.
still,
Yeah.
you still brave next door?
No, only the things that I'm
Yeah.
interested.
I mean, it's a very busy Target and we blocked off a lot of the
very
areas, so
noticeable.
parking, yes, people don't like, I mean, there's plenty of parking, but people don't wanna walk very far.
My next question is just generally on in and, oh, go ahead, yeah, if you just want between,
Before in?
yeah, if before.
Kate,
Perfect.
I'm just curious, Roosevelt Homes, that project, I think, I'm curious if the rains have had any influence on timing, success, especially the planting that slope.
Yeah, so well, I don't know, thankfully, but so the slope, it will happen next. So nothing has happened there. We're waiting on some ash tree removal that Roosevelt Homes is doing. So yeah, so that'll be the next part of this project, but the contractor was able to start planting today. So the plants are in the ground for the smaller basin and then they should finish the other one hopefully tomorrow. Yeah, they were hesitant, you know, they were a little bit worried about the rains and whatnot, but the basins have been draining nicely, some minor erosion, but they were able to fix all of it. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on them.
That's gonna dovetail into a question that I'll have. So for those who've had an opportunity to, there's a link at the top of these status reports, but if you click it, you can go see kind of on track, off track type of things, which I do as a passing glance. And for I was kind of expecting to see that one might be off track for the Fish Creek tributary improvements,
Yeah,
just
I
given.
wouldn't say
some
we're
of the
off track
backstory.
yet.
Okay, not yet. Okay, just
So
curious.
we're still hanging on to the, the similar, you know, deadlines that we're hoping.
Okay,
So I think what we hope is that we could get these easements secured. So we can actually build this and get it planted before the growing season is totally done. So otherwise we kind of have a two-part project. We do the work. of the
Well, and
conservation
the budget like kind of splits a little
Yeah.
funnier.
Yeah. Like,
Okay.
you might see it as.
I know we talked about this early on, but just coming back to a comment I think Ben made last month. It would be really nice to make sure that the neighbors are really engaged, especially so we have it too around Tamarack Nature Preserve where people just will throw their leaves and throw their other stuff there in the empty area. So just to make sure that, you know, just because it's being cleaned doesn't mean that it's clean for you to
Just
reuse.
Yeah.
And I think that's an opportunity for just for public engagement and in education and posting of this is a water, you know, a wetland, please protect.
Yes, yeah, that was good, yeah. Yeah.
My next thing is honestly pointing out something similar to what Mark said. It was really great to see the write-ups on the kids and the interns. Forgive me, that write-up with the engagement of the students
Yes.
and the interns, two separate comments. Apologize. I always enjoy those, especially the picture of Lauren talking on the TV show. I don't have any further questions. I do have a comment for next month's meeting, and it builds on something you said earlier, Stephanie. And as we look forward to engaging the public, I think we do a great job with signage. We do a great job with education. My question then becomes, are we leveraging CAC enough? Are there other avenues to do? I really like the comment that you said with the lake restoration, like even the shoreline restoration. Is there a way that they can come in and help offset or educate some residents that are interested? And or this cottage place, can we engage them, the CAC, to start talking about it? I know this is something that CAC does. I absolutely know, but is there a way for us to say, hey, there could be some targeted areas for us to look into for, like, we need help at this time point for this particular project? It was just a thought I was having that you had kind of triggered.
If there are particular projects like Cottage Place, I would say, I mean, the next meeting's on the 11th, I'd be happy to bring these thoughts and discussions to that meeting. I can even, email Carrie and get it on the discussion, like the board is interested in talking about how to better engage this group and utilize the skills you have.
Yeah, I think it's good to have that discussion. We have planned out, they
Yeah.
have a lot on there.
They totally do.
Their plate for this next year, or this next season, I guess, but I think it is good to talk about where those things can happen, and I don't think it's during construction. I think we'll keep our construction process
Like the
tight.
cottage place might just be next year, you know what I mean? Like, so as they think through their backlog of work.
One of the things that comes to my mind is they like to do plantings. They let a lot of my camps on. Cottage Place is, going to be contracted for
Yeah,
a good portion of that. It's not necessarily a district project per se, but in some respects, it seems like there might be some opportunity for planting, at least in the future.
I think
And if that kind of thing were to pass, it'd be a perfect opportunity to also do somehow a leaflet drop to residents in the area. Because it's citizen to citizen.
Come join us.
Yeah, and it might be a real interesting kind of dynamic to have that, those conversations, and you're working side by side. So
Yeah, I think if we maybe broaden that discussion with the CAC around just project engagement in general, maybe not specific to just Cottage Place, but other projects.
Yeah, I think it's just a really nice example.
I agree.
But yeah, totally aligned.
Similar to anything, you gotta get on their list to
That's
think about.
I always think about
just
work
kinda start
amounts and
into-
like, how do you start the conversation for next year in the planning is kind of my thought. Awesome, that's the point. You just had a great comment. I wanted to trigger the thought. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I have one quick question that's not necessarily in this list. With the rains that we've had, have we utilized the system of the weir and Killer Lake and, drawing water down in the anticipation of big event?
No, it
We haven't
hasn't
done
been
that yet.
that, well, mostly because the water levels are so low.
From
We
the
haven't
droughts
needed
earlier.
it.
And now it's charged up.
I did look at the lake levels today, and it sounds like we've been out there recently to make sure the lake level stations work. And Phelan's still under a foot higher than. So it hasn't.
Yeah, check out the Power BI tools. Those are quite.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second?
I'll second it.
Thank you for a wonderful board meeting. Thank you.
I don't know if you need to know